Hi folks, in this video I'm going to be talking to you about a Grateful Dead song called China Cat's Sunflower, which they often paired with another song called I Know You Rider in a kind of seamless suite or medley, and I'm going to be talking about the transition between the two songs and I Know You Rider in the next video. In this video we're just going to talk about China Cat's Sunflower. And the version of the song that I'm going to be talking about is the one that I consider to be canonical. It's from their album Europe 72. Here is the cover image, this iconic painting called Ice Cream Boy, which I don't know what it has to do with anything, but it's iconic. All right. So here is the beginning of the song. So what you're hearing in the left channel is Jerry Garcia playing lead guitar. In the right channel, you've got Bob Weir playing counter melody on rhythm guitar. And the scale that they're playing is called G Mixolydian mode. Here it is. And the Grateful Dead loved Mixolydian mode. They used it for everything. And it's a pretty interesting scale. It's very similar to the G major scale. The key difference is in the 7th scale degree. In G major, it's F sharp, and in G Mixolydian, it's F natural. Doesn't seem like a big difference, but it does change the feeling of the scale quite a bit. One of the characteristic chord progressions of Mixolydian mode is this. So this is the tonic chord G, and then this is called the 7 chord F. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, because it's on the 7th degree of the scale. You hear that a lot in Mixolydian mode, and the Grateful Dead used it all the time. So the tempo here is about 93 BPM, 92, 93. It's kind of a medium funk feel. And they're just going to be grooving along on G Mixolydian and occasionally hitting an F chord. And then the first verse will start, so here we go. We should talk about Phil Lesh's bass playing. He was a very unconventional bass player. He actually did not play the bass until he joined the Grateful Dead. He was a classical trumpet player. Jerry Garcia just asked him to learn how to play the bass to replace their first bass player. And he plays bass, and he describes it in his autobiography as if he's doing like the cantus firmus and like Bach counterpoint. So he's basically just like improvising counterpoint rather than playing a repeated bass figure, which either makes him a delightful bass player or a very annoying bass player, depending on your tastes. All right, so anyway, let's jump ahead to verse 1. So we're still sitting on G Mixolydian, but then when we get to the end of verse 1 and go into the first guitar solo, the mode changes. So I know that we said we were in G Mixolydian and not G major, but in this section it really does feel like we are in straight G major. And it especially feels that way when we get to measure 29, when we get to this chord change. So that chord is a D7. It's called the 5 chord in G major. 2, 3, 4, 5. If you build the chord every other note, then you get D7. And the conventional thing in like classical music would be to go from 5 to 1, or to go 4 to 5 to 1. So here's the 4 chord, 1, 2, 3, 4. That's a C chord. But notice that I labeled it here as being possibly in D Mixolydian because they sit on this D7 chord for an awfully long time. I mean, after about 2 measures of that, I forget that we're in G major, and I just start to hear D as being like the root. I start to hear this as D Mixolydian mode. It's subjective, but yeah, that is what I hear. And then a pretty interesting thing happens with the meter at the end of this little solo. So you can see there's a measure of 2 in there. This measure is only 2 beats long. So the form becomes kind of uneven. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. So that's odd. But then we have this 4-5-1 progression back in G major. 4, 5, 1. Except that we don't land on G, we land on G7. Which puts us back in G Mixolydian, not G major. Pretty interesting. All right, so then the second verse is exactly the same as the first verse, and then we have the second solo that is formally, structurally identical to the first solo, but it ends differently. So we've got this bar of 2, and we've got this C to D7, but then instead of landing back on G7, we're going to land on E7. Right, so instead of landing on this G7, implying G Mixolydian, we're now on E7, which implies E Mixolydian. And they don't prepare this in any way. They just slam you into the key of E Mixo. And they do it just by asserting it, right? They just hit it hard in a metrically strong position, and then they repeat it. That said, there is musical logic to it. You could think of this C to D7 to E as being a flat 6, 7, 1. That chord progression doesn't have a formal name. I've heard it referred to as the Billy Shears progression from Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. Billy Shears. Or the Super Mario Brothers progression, because they use it a lot in the Super Mario Brothers music, however you want to think of it. So this solo is identical to the other solos, except that it is in E instead of G. And we get to this part where it goes to... So it goes to B7. B7 is the 5 chord, not in E Mixolydian, but in straight E major. If you go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, you get this B7 chord, which you would expect to resolve to E major. But it doesn't. We sit on B7 for a while. We've got this bar of 2. We've got this 4, 5 that in E, that A to B7. So if we were in E and we had the 4 chord to 5, that would be a very conventional way to resolve this little section, but no, it doesn't end on E, it ends on G. So it's not totally nonsensical. That B7 chord, it's got F sharp in it. And you could think of F sharp as being the the leading tone in G, right? You can hear it. Da, da. And sometimes jazz musicians will use B7 as a substitute dominant chord in the key of G, but it's unconventional. All right, so we're back in G Mixo. We stay in G Mixo for the rest of the third verse. And then instead of another guitar solo after verse 3, we start this transitional jam that is going to take us into I Know You Rider. And that is going to be the subject of the next video, so please watch it.